How can
You
cheap
don't
garbage
deserve
bakes like
this.
this even think of standing in the same line as my $1,000 pastry booth? A single bitter insult from Victoria shattered what should have been a warm day for a single father and his son. Targeted for his obese frame and a simple homemade raspberry tray, Julian endured a barrage of cold sneers, quietly moving their small table to a dark, isolated corner right by the restroom doors. Yet, behind his patient eyes and simple gray shirt, Julian carried a shocking secret one that would soon shatter Victoria's arrogance to pieces. Will a father's quiet composure be enough to shield his son from cruel humiliation? And what secret inside his locked oak box will deliver the ultimate justice? If you believe a loving father's quiet dignity will always win over cruel arrogance, leave a like and stay tuned for what happens next. That morning, Julian Miller pushed open the heavy glass doors of Green River Elementary, carrying a handcrafted oak tray loaded with fresh raspberry tarts. Beside him, 10-year-old Toby walked quietly, holding a small cardboard sign and a tin cash box. They had woken up at 4 in the morning, working side by side in their small kitchen to roll the dough, prepare the fresh berries, and finish the crusts. "Dad, are we in the right spot?" Toby whispered, looking up at the high ceiling of the crowded main lobby as he held the wooden tray tightly. "Right here, buddy," Julian replied softly, looking at the layout map on his phone and checking his wristwatch. Table 42. But before they could walk 10 paces toward the check-in desk, Victoria Vance stepped directly into their path. She adjusted her tortoiseshell glasses and offered a sweet, practiced social smile, though her eyes narrowed sharply as she looked at Julian's heavy frame. She tilted her head, glaring down at the modest wooden tray bakes wrapped in plain wax paper. "Oh, Julian, sweetie, look," Victoria said, her voice dripping with artificial warmth so every parent waiting in line could hear every single word. "We appreciate the parent participation, but our school event requires a certain standard of presentation. Simple homemade bakes like this might not fit our official PTA table." Behind Victoria, 2 wealthy PTA mothers standing by a gold leaf macaron tower lowered their coffee cups and chuckled softly. Toby shrank back, clutching his father's simple gray shirt sleeve until his knuckles turned white. Julian didn't lose his temper or raise his voice. He stepped forward calmly, placing his broad shoulder directly between Victoria and his son, setting the heavy oak tray onto the edge of the velvet-covered reception table. He straightened his posture, holding the heavy wooden tray with absolute stability. "I'm here for my son, Mrs. Vance," Julian said, his deep voice remaining steady, quiet, and firm. "Our bakes are made with care and fresh ingredients, not expensive labels." Victoria's smile stiffened for a split second before she smoothed her designer skirt. She leaned in with a subtle, mocking tilt of her head. "Well, Mr. Miller, as event coordinator, I must ensure every vendor is officially verified. Did you actually obtain an approved registration pass, or are you just setting up without permission?" Julian calmly reached inside his simple gray shirt and pulled out an official vendor registration sheet stamped with the green verification seal of the school principal's office. He set the paper neatly on the reception table. Victoria paused for a moment, her eyes flashing with annoyance when she saw the official stamp proving he had paid his $5 fee at the main office 3 days ago. But she quickly recovered her polite, condescending composure. She tapped her manicured nails twice against her clipboard, then noticed the heavy dark oak box Julian held firmly under his left arm, secured with a brass padlock. "Oh, what are you bringing that bulky wooden box in here for?" Victoria asked, leaning closer with a softly veiled warning. "We must be so careful with event safety guidelines for the kids. We really can't allow uninspected containers inside the hall." She reached out her hand as if to lift the brass latch herself. Julian smoothly shifted his arm back, keeping the oak box safely behind his body. His right hand instinctively covered the small brass key hanging from a leather cord around his neck, hiding a faint crescent-shaped scar on the back of his right hand. He tightened his grip on the smooth wooden handles of the box, making sure it remained balanced and fully secured. "These are my personal tools, ma'am," Julian said, his voice low, firm, and completely controlled. "They are completely clean and safe." Seeing that she couldn't legally confiscate his equipment or kick him out, Victoria tilted her head with a sweet, patronizing nod. "Of course. Well, as coordinator, I'll assign you your table space right away." She marked her clipboard with a sharp red pen and pointed toward the very end of the building. Whispers about Julian's heavy frame and plain appearance echoed from nearby display tables of wealthy parents as Julian and Toby walked past the main display rows. Bright balloon arches and 5-tier macaron towers filled the main floor, creating a stark contrast with Julian's simple wooden tray. Toby looked down at his worn canvas sneakers, holding his father's hand tightly as they passed the whispering crowds. "Dad," Toby whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "Is our cake really not as pretty as theirs?" Julian slowly sank down onto one knee on the hard floor, bringing himself down to Toby's eye level. He looked deep into his boy's eyes, a calm, reassuring smile spreading across his face. He gently wrapped his large, calloused hands around Toby's small fingers. "The value of food comes from the love you put in, Toby," Julian whispered gently. "Your mother always believed that. Never doubt what we made together today." As they stepped into the gymnasium, Toby pointed to the row of shiny golden trophy displays near the main stage. Julian gently squeezed his small hand with deep warmth, whispering words of quiet encouragement. Toby nodded, a spark of comfort and quiet pride returning to his eyes. Julian stood up, grasped Toby's small hand firmly, and held his head high as they walked through the hall doors toward their assigned table in the back corridor, unbothered by the judging stares around them. A young PTA student volunteer led Julian and Toby down the long, echoing hallway to a scratched folding table placed directly beside the side entrance to the public restrooms. A faded blue restroom directional sign hung overhead on the wall, and the noisy, rattling hum of an old ventilation fan echoed continuously against the bare concrete surfaces. A faint smell of yellow floor disinfectant hung in the cool air, completely isolated from the warmth and luxury of the main lobby. "Mrs. Vance assigned you table 42, the volunteer said awkwardly, holding her clipboard tight against her chest and avoiding eye contact. "It's a bit tucked away in the back corridor, but the official event layout was finalized by the PTA committee 3 days ago." "It's all right, thank you," Julian replied politely, offering a gentle nod. "It's quiet enough for us to work." Farther down the corridor, Victoria stood by a massive decorative PTA banner that effectively blocked the line of sight to table 42, naturally directing all foot traffic toward the main luxury tables in the front hall. Toby looked at the isolated corner, his small shoulders dropping as he let out a quiet sigh. Julian didn't complain or express any frustration. He set his heavy oak tray down on the scratched folding table, pulled a small leather-bound notebook tied with twine from his pocket, and placed it neatly on the corner of the wooden surface. Julian smoothed his hand over the worn wood, making sure there were no splinters. He checked the leg supports of the table, placing a folded piece of cardboard underneath one leg to ensure it remained completely stable on the linoleum floor. Toby adjusted the price tag on the front, checking the numbers carefully. Julian carefully adjusted the position of his tin cash box, locking it with a small key. Water dripped slowly from a leaky pipe inside the restroom, echoing softly in the quiet hallway. Toby unzipped his backpack, pulling out paper napkins and setting them beside the notebook. Julian unzipped his gray Yeti cooler bag under the table and pulled out a clean, cream-colored linen tablecloth. With smooth, precise movements developed over decades in 3-star Michelin kitchens, he spread the cloth across table 42, pulling every corner tight until there wasn't a single wrinkle left on the surface. His large, calloused hands moved with extraordinary grace and agility, transforming the dull folding table into an elegant display station. He put on a pair of disposable nitrile gloves and handed a smaller pair to Toby. Together they opened the wooden container and began arranging the fresh raspberry tarts on white paper plates, building a balanced, elegant pyramid display. Julian checked the cold temperature seal of the Yeti cooler, making sure the crusts stayed perfectly crisp. The deep red raspberries glistened under the hall lights, releasing a subtle, warm aroma of fresh berries and toasted butter into the quiet corridor. Julian reached down into the cooler bag again, checking the sealed mason jars containing his homemade raspberry glaze. He wiped the glass jars with a clean towel, making sure everything remained pristine. He checked the smooth wooden surface of the cutting board, ensuring every single tool was laid out with military precision. He adjusted the angle of each plate so the sunlight from the high window caught the golden crusts. Toby's eyes lit up with pride as he stepped back to admire their setup. "Dad, our table looks just like the banquet display in Mom's old recipe photo book." Julian smiled softly, leaning over to place his large, warm hand over Toby's shoulder. "Your mom always said, no matter where you are, Neatness and respect for food make people feel your heart. When you take pride in what you do, the setting doesn't matter, son. Out in the main lobby, loud laughter and upbeat music echoed as crowds of wealthy parents gathered around Victoria's glittering gold macaron booth, buying expensive pastries and taking pictures. Table 42 remained completely quiet, tucked away in the back corridor as families walked past without turning their heads. Toby watched the large crowd from afar, holding his tin cash box tight against his chest as his head dropped slightly. Julian reached down into his canvas bag and pulled out a small hand-painted wooden sign. On it, Toby had carefully painted the words, "Toby and Dad's Bake Stand $3 Fresh Raspberry Tart," complete with a little hand-drawn raspberry in the corner. Julian carefully set the sign right in the center of their table, adjusting a small wooden wedge underneath so it stood perfectly straight. He placed his large hand on Toby's head, looking into his son's eyes with quiet, unwavering confidence. If even one single customer comes by and recognizes true quality, every bit of our hard work today is completely worth it, son. The scent of sweet butter and fresh raspberries drifted gently through the corridor, filling their small corner with warmth. Julian wiped the wooden edge of the table once more, standing tall and proud beside his boy. Toby looked up at his father's calm face, feeling the warmth of his hand. He took a deep breath, adjusted his small apron, and stood tall beside the table. Julian smoothed down the edge of the linen tablecloth, his calm smile radiating a quiet warmth that melted away the cold isolation of the back corner. They stood shoulder to shoulder, holding their heads high, ready to share their delicious homemade food with anyone who stopped by their small table. Victoria Vance stood right in the center of the main gymnasium, holding a white megaphone to direct the crowded room. Beside her, a massive 5-tier gold leaf macaron tower sat on a velvet table surrounded by imported French pastry boxes. The rustle of $100 bills and loud compliments filled the air as wealthy PTA parents crowded around the main booth to drop cash into the charity box. "Everyone gather around the main official table, please," Victoria announced over the megaphone, her voice dripping with artificial warmth and authority. "Our bakes today are custom ordered from the city's finest French bakery. A school event like ours must always maintain the highest standard." A PETA mother quickly handed over a crisp $100 bill, smiling broadly to secure favor for her child. "Mrs. Vance, you organized everything so beautifully. Truly first class." Victoria nodded with immense satisfaction, smoothing her hair with a smug, proud smile as she held the white megaphone tight against her chest. Far in the back corridor at table 42, Toby watched the noisy, glittering crowd from afar, then looked down at their humble wooden tray of homemade raspberry tarts. He squeezed his tin cash box tight against his chest. "Dad, everyone is over there buying those expensive gold cakes. Nobody is even looking at our table." Julian dropped onto one knee on the floor, placing his large, warm hand on Toby's shoulder. "Real good food comes from fresh butter and care, Toby. Not expensive labels," Julian whispered softly, looking right into his boy's eyes. "We just focus on doing our work right, never doubt the quality of what we built today." Just then, the warm scent of toasted butter and fresh raspberries drifted out from table 42 into the main aisle. The aroma of fresh raspberries and warm vanilla grew stronger with every passing minute, filling the hallway. Two passing mothers stopped in their tracks, sniffing the air with curiosity and turning toward the back corridor. Victoria's social smile instantly stiffened as she saw their attention shifting toward Julian's table. Victoria glanced toward the center stage, where a glittering gold-plated trophy sat on a velvet pedestal, the Best Bake Stand Award. Winning this title carried significant prestige, granting extra points for her daughter's upcoming application to an elite private middle school. Victoria was determined to let nothing compromise her victory. Noticing two mothers whispering about the delightful berry fragrance coming from table 42, Victoria glided over with a polished, friendly smile. She leaned in close to one mother, Sarah, resting a manicured hand gently on her forearm. "You know, Sarah, dear," Victoria whispered in a soft, sweet tone that carried an unspoken warning, "we really need everyone's full support focused on our main official PTA table today. By the way, the committee is reviewing auditions for the lead role in the Spring Drama Club next week. Your daughter is doing so wonderfully." Sarah's face paled slightly as she caught the subtle threat. She quickly withdrew her glance from the back corridor, offering an anxious smile. "Of course, Victoria. We're buying all our treats right here at the main booth." Standing near a wooden pillar just 20 feet away, a distinguished man in a dark coat and dark tortoiseshell sunglasses quietly observed the entire interaction. It was Harrison Ford, the renowned lead food critic for Gourmet US magazine, attending incognito as a guest. He pulled a silver Mont Blanc pen from his pocket, noting the exact time, 10:15 a.m. in a small leather notebook. Harrison adjusted his collar, watching Victoria's subtle intimidation tactics with cold eyes. Using PTA influence to manipulate a kid's charity fair, Harrison muttered softly to himself under his breath. Absolutely shameful. He closed his notebook, turned away from Victoria's glittering display, and began walking purposefully down the side hallway toward table 42. Victoria smoothed her dress and strutted past the entrance of the back corridor, casting a patronizing glance at table 42. Seeing Julian standing beside his modest setup with only a small tin cash box, a condescending smirk spread across her face. "Julian, dear," Victoria called out with passive-aggressive sweetness, her voice dripping with mock concern. "If your stand is too quiet and you'd like to pack up early, just let me know. We can always use extra hands clearing trash from the main floor." Julian didn't react with anger or raise his voice. He calmly picked up a clean cloth and wiped a tiny, stray drop of water from the wooden edge of the table. He straightened his apron, adjusting his posture with quiet strength. Then he raised his head, his deep, intense eyes locking onto Victoria's gaze with absolute composure. The quiet power in his posture made Victoria hesitate for a split second, her smirk faltering. "Thank you, Mrs. Vance," Julian replied, his low voice steady and unshakable. "But my place is beside my son and will stay until the end." Toby looked up at his father with immense pride, his small hand reaching out to touch Julian's sleeve. Toby held his father's simple gray sleeve tightly, feeling safe despite Victoria's hostile presence. Julian gently rested his hand over the brass latch of his locked oak box, feeling the cold metal beneath his fingers. "If you were Julian in this situation, would you stay calm for your child or confront the bully right away? Leave your thoughts in the comments below." Julian watched Victoria turn on her high heels and walk away with an arrogant posture. His eyes flashed with quiet, unyielding determination as his fingers rested firmly against the padlock of his wooden box. Two fourth-grade students walking down the side hallway suddenly slowed their steps near the restroom entrance. The rich, warm scent of baked butter and fresh fruit drifting from table 42 caught their attention immediately. They turned their heads, curiosity sparkling in their eyes as they looked toward Julian's neatly arranged display. The deep crimson raspberry glaze glistened under the hall lights, releasing a sweet aroma of vanilla and fresh berries. "Hey, look over there," one of the girls whispered to her friend, pointing at the deep red berries glistening on white paper plates. "That smells amazing, way better than the hallway air." Toby's face lit up instantly. He stepped forward with a warm, welcoming smile, holding up his small wooden sign. "Fresh raspberry tarts, $3 each. We made them ourselves from scratch this morning." Julian smiled gently at the young visitors. He picked up a clean pair of stainless steel tongs and a sharp knife, carefully cutting 2 small sample bites. He placed them onto small compostable paper plates. "Would you kids like to try a fresh sample bite?" Julian asked softly, handing the plates over. The 2 children took the sample plates eagerly and bit in. Their eyes widened instantly in absolute delight. The flaky, buttery crust crumbled perfectly on their tongues, giving way to the rich, tangy sweet flavor of fresh raspberry preserve. "Wow," one boy exclaimed, his mouth full as he smiled widely. "This is 10 times better than those rock-hard macarons out there. It's so soft and sweet." Julian chuckled warmly, wiping his cutting board clean with a damp towel. "That's thanks to fresh mashing raspberries picked this morning, kids. Enjoy your morning." The 2 children swallowed their bites, grinned brightly at Toby, and immediately turned around, running down the hall with fast steps to call their classmates. Within 5 minutes, the quiet back corridor echoed with the loud, cheerful pitter-patter of running sneakers on the linoleum floor. More than a dozen kids swarmed toward table 42, clutching crumpled $1 and $5 bills from their pocket money. "I want one," a young boy yelled, pushing to the front and holding up his $3. "My friend said your raspberry tarts are the best in the whole school."
"Me too, 2 tarts, please, 1 for my sister,"
another girl shouted eagerly, laying her crumpled bill on the table. Toby was glowing with pure happiness. He worked alongside Julian, carefully picking up tarts with metal tongs, placing them into small craft paper boxes and organizing change inside his tin cash box. He stacked the $1 bills neatly, his small hands moving with quick efficiency. Every bit of his earlier shame and sadness completely melted away, replaced by deep pride. Half of their fresh raspberry tarts sold out in just 15 minutes. Word of mouth spread rapidly down the hallways, attracting not just students but curious parents who smelled the baking from the main gym. Toby looked up at his father, his cheeks rosy and his eyes shining bright with excitement. "Dad, look, they all love our cakes. The box is almost full." Julian patted Toby's head gently, a warm, proud smile spreading across his broad face. "I told you, son," Julian whispered softly, his voice steady. "Kids always know what's real and made with heart." Over in the main hall, Victoria stood beside her quiet gold macaron booth. She noticed the sudden rush of students and parents running toward the back corridor, her eyes narrowing sharply as she realized where everyone was going. Victoria's face darkened as she watched her expensive macaron booth grow completely quiet while a loud crowd gathered around table 42. Panic and bitter envy flared inside her chest. If Julian's $3 booth stole the crowd's vote, her daughter's chances of winning the Best Bake Stand trophy would be completely ruined. Smoothing her designer dress, Victoria picked up her white megaphone and raised it to her lips, stepping angrily toward the aisle entrance. "Attention, students!" Victoria announced over the loudspeaker, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness and tight authority. "It's almost time to gather at the main stage for the presentation. Parents, please ensure your children only consume items with verified official ingredient labels." She then leaned toward two nearby mothers, whispering in a low, concerned tone, "You know, unverified homemade bakes often carry hidden allergens. We really shouldn't risk our children's health with cheap food." Julian overheard her words clearly across the quiet hall. Without losing his calm composure, he reached into his simple gray shirt pocket and pulled out a clean laminated card. He placed it right on the center of table 42 beside the tart display. It was his official Oregon State Food Safety Handler certificate, stamped with an official state verification seal. "Our tarts are made from 100% natural raspberries, Mrs. Vance," Julian said calmly, his deep voice clear enough for surrounding parents to hear. "And we are fully certified by the Oregon Health Department. You don't need to worry so much." Victoria's sweet smile froze on her face as parents looked at the official health card, nodded approvingly, and continued lining up for tarts. She glared bitterly at the half-empty tray, her face flushing red with embarrassment as praises for Julian's baking echoed down the hall. Across the main gym floor, Victoria Vance watched in growing horror as her luxury macaron tower sat completely ignored under the bright lights. Meanwhile, a long, bustling line of parents and laughing children stretched all the way down the back hallway toward table 42. Seeing her status and her daughter's trophy threatened by a single dad selling $3 tarts, Victoria's ego completely fractured. She glared at the tin cash box brimming with small bills on table 42, her chest heaving with uncontrolled envy. Her polite, sugary facade shattered into pieces. Her eyes turned bloodshot with fury, her manicured fingers clenching into tight fists. She grabbed her white megaphone, marching down the hallway with heavy, aggressive footsteps, her high heels clicking sharply against the floor tiles. Parents stepped aside in alarm, sensing the dark storm brewing in her face. "This is an absolute violation," Victoria shouted, her voice harsh, raspy, and loud as she arrived at table 42. "This table is blocking the fire exit line. I am the PTA president, and I will not allow this trash table to exist here for another minute." She ignored the shocked looks from nearby volunteers, her mind completely fixated on destroying Julian's booth. Toby shrank back, trembling slightly as he instinctively shielded their very last special tart, a large heart-shaped raspberry tart he had baked with Julian, using his late mother's favorite recipe. Julian stepped forward immediately, his broad chest forming an impenetrable wall between Victoria and his son. "This table is right where staff assigned it, Mrs. Vance," Julian said, his deep voice carrying a cold, quiet warning. "You're losing control of yourself. Get out of my way!" Victoria shrieked, stepping forward aggressively and reaching her hands toward the edge of their display table. As Julian held his ground, Victoria leaned forward violently. Pretending to stumble, she deliberately slammed her hip and forearm into the corner of the wooden table with full force. Clang! The heavy wooden tray flipped into the air. Toby's heart-shaped raspberry tart crashed face down onto the cold linoleum floor, shattering into dozens of messy pieces. Deep red mashing berries and golden crust crumbled across the dirty floor tiles. Victoria stepped back, smoothing her designer jacket with a malicious smirk. "Oops, my hand slipped," she sneered, her voice dripping with cruel satisfaction. "But cheap stuff on the floor is right where it belongs anyway." Toby froze in shock, then dropped to his knees on the cold ground. Tears welled up in his eyes and overflowed down his cheeks. He reached out with trembling, berry-stained hands, desperately trying to scoop up the ruined crust. "Mom's cake," Toby sobbed, his voice cracking with unbearable heartbreak. "Dad, she ruined Mom's memory cake," a mother standing just 3 feet away gasped in horror. Appalled by Victoria's sickening cruelty toward a young child, she quickly pulled out her iPhone 15 Pro Max, tapping the screen to start a live stream to the local Green River parent group. Within seconds, the viewer counter shot up rapidly from 20 to over 300 viewers. The mother recording the live stream stepped closer, holding the phone steady as the live chat exploded with angry comments from local parents. "Look at what the PTA president just did to this little boy's food," the mother called out loudly into her phone, pointing the camera straight at Victoria. "She just destroyed a child's cake on purpose. Look at her face." A suffocating silence fell across the hall as surrounding parents stopped in their tracks, staring at Victoria with absolute disgust and anger. Julian dropped onto both knees beside Toby on the hard floor, pulling his weeping son close against his broad chest. Sweat dripped down his nose, his broad shoulders trembling under the heavy emotional weight. For 30 unbearable seconds, Julian fell into a deep, painful struggle. Sweat poured down his forehead, his broad hands trembled violently, and tears filled his deep eyes. The crushing grief of his wife's passing and years of self-doubt as an obese, struggling single father crashed over him like a wave. He felt his chest tighten, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Toby looked up through his tears, reaching a tiny berry-stained hand to touch Julian's trembling cheek. "Dad," Toby whispered softly, his voice trembling with pure love. "Mom always said your baking brings happiness to people. You can make it again, Dad. I know you can." Those simple words from his son pierced through Julian's pain like a beam of light. Julian closed his eyes, taking a deep, steadying breath that filled his lungs. The trembling in his hands stopped instantly. Julian stood up slowly, rising to his full height. The quiet, intimidating aura of an executive pastry chef erupted from his posture. His eyes turned razor-sharp, filled with absolute composure and unshakable dignity. He looked straight into Victoria's eyes, his low voice echoing through the dead-silent hall like thunder. "Mrs. Vance, you just touched the only sacred thing a father protects with his life. If you were Julian in this situation, would you stay calm for your child or confront the bully right away? Is hurting a child's smile the ultimate unforgivable line? How evil would you rate Victoria? Leave your thoughts in the comments below." Toby wiped his tears, looking up at his father with complete unwavering faith. Dozens of smartphone screens lit up the hallway, capturing every single detail of the moment as Julian slowly reached for the brass key around his neck, ready to unlock his locked heavy oak box once and for all. Without a single word of hesitation or anger, Julian reached beneath table 42 and pulled out a heavy gray Yeti insulated cooler bag. He unzipped it smoothly, retrieving a sealed glass mason jar filled with fresh raspberry preserve and a pre-baked golden brown butter tart shell resting safely on a clean tray. He wiped the wooden table surface clean with a damp towel. Next, Julian placed his brass key into the padlock of the heavy oak box. With a sharp click, the lock opened. He lifted the lid, revealing a custom-molded velvet interior, holding a 6-piece professional pastry chef kit, a stainless steel offset palette knife, a serrated paring knife, precision culinary tweezers, and a silicone glazing brush. Engraved on the inside lid in gleaming gold lettering was the title Chef Julian Executive Pastry Chef. He carefully unrolled a clean white linen towel onto the table, placing each tool neatly in a row. The gleaming stainless steel tools reflected his intense, focused expression as he prepared his workstation. Victoria crossed her arms, a condescending smirk returning to her face as she scoffed loudly to the crowd. "Wasting your time," she sneered, pointing at the ruined cake on the floor. "The cake is ruined on the ground. No matter what pathetic setup you pull out of that wooden box, this booth is still trash." Julian didn't even look up at her. He pulled a pair of black nitrile gloves from the box and slipped them onto his large hands with a sharp, crisp snap that drew everyone's immediate attention. Fresh ingredients are right here, and pastry making never stops, Mrs. Vance, Julian said softly, his deep voice filled with absolute authority. He picked up his stainless steel offset palette knife, the polished metal gleaming brilliantly under the hallway lights, as surrounding parents watched in intense, silent anticipation. What followed was a hypnotic display of culinary mastery that left the entire hall spellbound. Julian's large hands moved with blinding rhythmic precision and incredible delicacy. Surrounding parents crowded 3 layers deep around table 42, holding up their phones to record every single movement. Every movement of his hands was so precise it looked like a choreographed dance of high culinary art. With a single fluid motion of his offset palette knife, he spread a razor-thin, perfectly even layer of deep crimson raspberry preserve across the buttery tart base. Not a single millimeter was out of place. He then used a microplane zester to lightly dust a hint of fresh lemon peel over the jam, releasing an intoxicating citrus scent. Next, he picked up a small serrated knife and precision culinary tweezers. Working at astonishing speed, Julian sliced fresh raspberries and placed each succulent berry segment in concentric, overlapping circles. The quiet, rhythmic clack-clack of his stainless steel tweezers against the tray echoed through the silent hallway. Within minutes, hundreds of fresh raspberry segments spiraled together, forming a breathtaking, 3-dimensional rose flower across the top of the tart. Finally, he used a silicone brush to lightly glaze the berries with natural fruit syrup, giving them a brilliant, glass-like shine. In just 8 minutes, a masterpiece of fresh raspberry rose tart worthy of a 3-star Michelin restaurant sat proudly on table 42. A heavenly aroma of toasted butter, vanilla bean, and fresh berries erupted into the air, captivating everyone standing nearby. Parents gasped in utter disbelief, leaning in closer with their phones recording the incredible technique. "Look at that tweezer work and spatula glide," one father whispered in awe to his wife. That level of skill that only belongs to top executive pastry chefs in Paris or New York. Toby looked up at the stunning cake, his eyes sparkling with immense pride. "Our cake is ready, Dad," Toby cheered softly. Julian smiled warmly at his son, picking up his slicing knife and cutting the master tart into neat, perfect square portions, placing each onto a compostable paper plate. "Fresh raspberry rose tart slices, $3 each for the school library fund," Julian announced, his voice warm, steady, and inviting. A sudden surge of excited parents and children rushed toward table 42. "I'll take 2 slices," a mother yelled, dropping a crisp $20 bill into the clear plastic library charity donation box. "Keep the change for the kids." "Me too, give me 3 slices," another father shouted, stuffing a $10 bill into the box slot. Toby worked beside his father, handing out paper napkins to happy customers and placing the cash bills neatly inside the donation box. Toby smiled brightly as the donation box grew heavier and heavier with money for the school library. Standing at the edge of the crowd, VIB food critic Harrison Sford stepped forward in his dark coat and dark tortoise shell sunglasses. He pulled out a $20 bill, dropped it into the donation box, and accepted a slice from Toby with a respectful nod. Harrison lifted the tart slice to his lips and took a small, deliberate bite. As his teeth broke through the crisp crust into the tangy velvet raspberry filling, Harrison froze completely. Behind his dark sunglasses, his eyes widened in profound shock. This crust texture, this perfect acid balance, Harrison whispered to himself in utter amazement, his voice trembling slightly with emotion. Unmistakable. Within 3 short minutes, every single slice of the fresh raspberry rose tart was completely sold out. The charity donation box overflowed with $5, $10, and $20 bills, raising hundreds of dollars for the school library. Toby beamed with pure joy, hugging the heavy cash box tightly against his chest. Meanwhile, across the gym, Victoria stood frozen beside her completely deserted $1,000 macaron booth, her face pale as a sheet. Every single slice of the $3 tart was sold out, the charity donation box overflowing with cash amidst thunderous applause echoing across the hall. Standing right beside table 42, Harrison Ford slowly raised his hand and removed his dark tortoiseshell sunglasses. He pinned his official Gourmet U.S. Magazine press badge onto his dark jacket lapel, revealing his sharp, unmistakable eyes. Gasps echoed through the crowd as several parents instantly recognized the nation's most respected food critic. Harrison stepped forward with quiet authority, picking up the small leather-bound recipe notebook from the wooden table. He held it high for the entire hall to see, opening the first page to reveal a gleaming gold-embossed seal. "Unmistakable," Harrison announced, his loud, clear voice booming across the dead-silent hall. "This is Chef Julian Miller, the world-renowned 3-star Michelin executive pastry chef who retired 3 years ago. This fresh raspberry rose tart is his legendary, exclusive signature masterpiece that won international awards." He turned the open notebook toward the surrounding parents, pointing to the official 3-star Michelin guide seal stamped beside Julian's signature. "Chef Julian Miller, executive pastry chef, 3 Michelin stars." Harrison read aloud from the notebook. "Chef Julian Miller, former head executive pastry chef at Le Grand Palais in Paris, awarded 3 Michelin stars in 2021. Harrison turned the pages of the notebook carefully, admiring the detailed pastry diagrams and Michelin seals. The gymnasium erupted into a wave of stunned, breathless whispers. Parents exchanged shocked glances, their eyes wide with disbelief. "Is that really Chef Julian?" a mother gasped. "He won International Pastry Chef of the Year." The humble, obese single father standing before them in a simple gray shirt was a world-famous culinary legend who had served heads of state and international royalty. Julian stood beside Toby with quiet composure, resting a warm hand gently on his son's shoulder. "I left the high-pressure restaurant world to be a full-time dad for Toby, Mr. Ford," Julian said softly, his voice full of steady pride. "My son's happiness is worth more than any Michelin star." Harrison nodded with deep respect, then turned his sharp, icy gaze directly toward Victoria's glittering macaron booth. Harrison marched purposefully over to Victoria's tier gold macaron tower. He picked up one of the imported French macarons, lifted it to his lips and bit into it. Almost instantly, Harrison grimaced in deep disgust, spitting the bite directly into a paper napkin right in front of the entire gathering. He lifted the edge of the velvet tablecloth, pulling out a discarded cardboard box labeled Budget Wholesale Commercial Bakery, $29.99. He grabbed the wireless event microphone from the reception desk, his stern voice booming loudly through the gymnasium speakers. "This entire booth is an absolute fraud," Harrison declared sternly to the crowd. "These macarons are cheap, mass-produced frozen items bought from a budget commercial warehouse for $30. They were thawed out 2 hours ago and dusted with cheap foil glitter. You lied to everyone about ordering custom pastries from an authentic French boulangerie just to scam parents for social prestige, Mrs. Vance." A sudden wave of intense fury exploded across the hall. The PTA mothers, who had handed over crisp $100 bills, gasped in outrage, their faces turning bright red with anger. The school principal walked over, picked up the cheap commercial box, and shook his head in deep disappointment. Victoria trembled as the principal demanded to see her receipts for the PTA event. "You lied to us, Victoria," one mother screamed in betrayal. "We gave you hundreds of dollars of charity money while you served our kids cheap frozen junk. We demand a full audit of the PTA accounts right now." The principal immediately announced that a formal investigation into the PTA funds would begin on Monday morning. Victoria swallowed hard, realizing her reputation was utterly ruined. Victoria stood frozen on her high heels, her face turning pale as a sheet as cold sweat poured down her neck. She stammered helplessly, her hands shaking violently. "No. I ordered them, from a real French bakery. It's a misunderstanding." Dozens of furious parents swarmed her booth, shouting angrily and demanding their donation money back immediately. The school principal and board members stepped forward immediately, taking the gold-plated Best Bake Stand trophy off the velvet pedestal. They officially disqualified Victoria and her daughter from the event for fraud, lying, and unethical conduct. Seeing Julian holding Toby proudly while surrounding parents cheered and applauded for his incredible character and world-class talent, Victoria's narcissistic ego completely collapsed into blind, poisonous hatred. She could not stomach being exposed and humiliated before the entire school community. Desperate to destroy Julian at any cost and ruin his victory, Victoria backed away into the dark shadows behind a large brick pillar in the side hallway. With trembling, frantic fingers, she pulled out her iPhone and dialed 911. "Emergency dispatch," Victoria whispered frantically into her phone, her raspy voice shaking with unhinged malice. "Send armed police to Green River Elementary immediately. There is an obese, mentally unstable man wielding sharp butcher knives who is threatening children inside the hall. He has a box of weapons. Hurry before someone gets hurt." She hung up the phone, a twisted, insane smirk spreading across her pale face as she heard distant police sirens starting to wail in the distance. She gripped her phone tight, her eyes gleaming with bitter malice as the sirens grew louder outside the school building ground. She imagined armed SWAT officers rushing in to handcuff Julian in front of everyone. Victoria staggered back, standing beside her deserted $1,000 macaron booth, her narcissistic ego completely shattered amidst the disgusting glares of hundreds of parents. The loud, piercing wail of police sirens echoed from the school parking lot. Seconds later, the heavy double doors of the gymnasium swung open. 2 Oregon State Troopers, Officer Davis and his partner, entered the hall with alert, highly professional posture, their hands resting near their duty belts. Their shoulder radios crackled with emergency dispatch chatter, announcing an armed disturbance call at the school. Parents whispered nervously, stepping back toward the walls. "Everyone stay where you are. Keep calm," Officer Davis commanded, his firm voice cutting through the noisy hall. He scanned the room quickly, looking for any immediate safety threats or active weapons. Victoria immediately rushed out from behind her deserted macaron booth, pointing a frantic, trembling finger at Julian. "Officers, arrest him now!" Victoria shrieked frantically, her voice high-pitched and unhinged. "He brought a locked box of dangerous, sharp butcher knives into the school. He threatened me and all these innocent children. He's insane. Lock him up immediately." Julian remained completely calm. He stepped slightly in front of Toby to shield him, placing both of his large hands flat on table 42 in plain, clear sight of the officers. "I am a registered parent volunteer, officer," Julian said in a steady, deep voice, pointing to his Oregon food safety card on the table. "I pose no threat to anyone. I am Officer Davis," the lead trooper said sternly, looking around at the peaceful, quiet crowd. "Who dialed 911 to report an armed suspect, and what is actually happening here?" Before Victoria could speak again, the mother holding her iPhone stepped forward boldly from the front row. "I have the entire incident recorded on a live video stream, officer," she declared loudly to the police officers. Officer Davis stepped over to the parent, taking her iPhone to review the high-definition live stream recording. On the clear screen, the footage showed everything from start to finish, Victoria intentionally leaning over to shove table 42 with full force, smashing Toby's homemade heart-shaped cake onto the floor, sneering maliciously at a crying child, and then sneaking behind a brick pillar to make a false emergency call to 911. The principal pointed to the live comments, where over 400 parents were demanding immediate legal action against Victoria. Harrison Ford and the school principal stepped forward, giving formal written witness statements that corroborated the video evidence entirely. Officer Davis noted that in the state of Oregon, falsely reporting a violent weapon threat to 911 is a Class C felony punishable by up to 5 years in prison. Officer Davis's face hardened into a cold, stern expression. He turned around and walked directly toward Victoria. "Mrs. Vance, video evidence and multiple witness statements confirm that you deliberately made a false emergency dispatch report," Officer Davis announced sternly, unclipping heavy steel handcuffs from his utility belt. "Falsely reporting a violent armed threat is a severe crime of felony swatting and a waste of emergency state resources. You are being detained for investigation." Victoria's eyes widened in sheer horror as the reality hit her. "No, you can't do this to me," she screamed hysterically, backing away against her empty booth. "Do you know who I am? I am the PTA president." Officer Davis grabbed her wrists firmly, snapping the steel handcuffs around her wrists with a sharp, echoing clack-clack. He turned her toward the exit, reading her rights clearly. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney." The entire gymnasium erupted into thunderous cheers, clapping, and loud applause as the officers escorted a sobbing, humiliated Victoria out to the police cruiser. As the police car drove away outside, flashing camera lights and enthusiastic cheers filled the entire gymnasium hall. Julian looked down at his son, offering him a warm, steady smile. He leaned down, placing his large hands under Toby's arms, and lifted the young boy high up into his strong, loving embrace. Toby wrapped his arms tightly around his father's neck, resting his cheek against Julian's broad shoulder with a bright, triumphant smile. Toby proudly held a small Bake Sale Appreciation Award ribbon in his hand, looking at Harrison Ford, who gave the young boy a warm thumbs up. Toby beamed with pure happiness, his eyes sparkling as he looked out at the cheering crowd of parents and friends. He knew his father had won not through anger or hostility, but through quiet dignity, patience, and undeniable culinary skill. Julian held his son tightly against his chest, walking into the center of the hall to accept the wild applause and respect of the entire school community. Parents clapped rhythmically as Julian carried Toby around the hall. The entire community felt a deep sense of justice and joy. Toby rested his head on his father's shoulder, feeling completely safe and proud. "We won, Toby," Julian whispered softly into his son's ear, his deep voice full of warmth and love. Not with violence or shouting, but with patience, hard work, and kindness. True class always shines in silence. What do you think about the just punishment for the 911 caller? Leave a message for this dad and subscribe to our channel. With broad smiles on their faces, Julian and Toby presented the heavy donation box filled with hundreds of dollars to the school principal for the library fund. The principal shook Julian's hand with immense gratitude, presenting him and Toby with an honorary bake sale appreciation award. A short while later, Julian and Toby walked out of Green River Elementary hand in hand. The warm Oregon afternoon sun shone brightly over the school courtyard as Julian carried his locked oak box under one arm. Toby looked up at his father, his face glowing with warmth and pride. "Dad," Toby asked sweetly, tugging on his father's hand, "can we bake raspberry rose tarts together again this weekend?" Julian smiled warmly down at his son, squeezing his small hand tightly. "Of course, son," Julian replied gently. "We will always do that together."